What's up, you legends? Welcome back to my Unmatched Strategy Guide series. In today's episode, we are going to be unpacking Alice from Alice in Wonderland. As always, before we get into the video, I really recommend going back and at least watching the first 2 episodes of this series when I cover feints and basic cards, especially episode 2, because a lot of Alice's cards have skirmish effects attached to them, and I don't really want to explain the strategical usage for a card that lets you move after combat. So just go watch those videos and then come back. Or just watch this one, you mad lad. I can't stop you. Let's get right into Alice's stats. Alice is a melee character, which, I will note, is supposed to be pronounced melee, but I'm going to keep pronouncing it that way because I'm ignorant. With 13 health, and her sidekick, the Jabberwock, is also melee. And has 8 health, and they are both movement 2 characters. So right away I can tell you, movement 2 characters are not as good as movement 3 characters. But it is balanced because when Alice is big, which I'll explain in a couple minutes, you hit pretty hard, and if you had 3 movement, you would probably be Bigfoot levels of broken. So it's fair for Alice to be a movement 2 character. 13 health is currently the lowest single hero health pool. That's on par with both Dracula and Robin Hood. The average for a single hero is about 15 and change, but Alice does have a defensive bonus and about 6 points of healing, so this isn't really too much of a liability for her. 8 health is excellent for a sidekick, however. Before the Beowulf versus Little Red Riding Hood pack was announced, the largest sidekick health was 8. Both of the sidekicks in that pack have 9 health. The average is a little bit more than 7, but 8 health is very good for a sidekick. And their total health pool, 13 plus 8, is 21, which is about average for a hero. The double melee characters, though, is kind of bad with 2 movement, as faster characters or ranged characters will be able to kind of control the pace of when and where you can attack them a little bit better, especially if they have multiple sidekicks. You'll probably be at a small disadvantage in those matchups. Just keep that in mind. You do have a bunch of movement cards. You have a bunch of movement effects attached to your cards. So you're not totally deficient, but just keep in mind movement is probably your biggest weakness. Let's talk about her ability now. It says, when you place Alice, choose whether she starts the game big or small. When Alice is big, add 2 to the value of her attack cards. When Alice is small, add 1 to the value of her defense cards. And then it comes with this cool little token so that you can indicate what size Alice is. And it's in the shape of a keyhole, which is very nice. The great thing about this ability is that it cannot be canceled by feint. In the King Arthur video, I went over why King Arthur's ability sucks and why Alice's is a lot better than his. Rip King Arthur, I guess. If you're going first, I would suggest starting the game as big. If you're going second, I suggest starting the game as small, because usually in the first 2 opening moves of the game, or the first 2 turns, you'll maneuver twice. Your opponent will do the same, so you both have a full hand of cards, and then you'll maneuver again and attack the opponent. So if you're going first, usually you'll be attacking first, so it makes sense to get the combat bonus right away from being big. And if you're going second, it maybe makes sense to want to defend first. But because your ability specifically says when you place Alice, you get to draw your starting hand of cards before you place your character on the board, as per the rulebook. I double checked. So also consider what cards are in your starting hand when you're making your decision. And this is just a fun fact. Your cards in total let you change size 11 times. There's nothing really you can strategize about that, because it's like, oh, if you start big, then you'll end the game as small. But I think very rarely will you actually play all 11 cards. And generally strategizing for like an end game like that isn't really too relevant, because you tend to... I think Alice's ability favors an aggressive playstyle, because adding 2 to the value of all your attacks is insane. Like King Arthur gets around that on average, and he has to spend a card for that. The Raptors get +2 to their attacks, but they have to have all 3 of their characters surrounding the opponent, and basically you just get 2 for free and it can't be canceled. That's really good. So I think Alice generally wants to end the game pretty fast using this ability. Don't even think about what the game is going to look like in 10 turns, I think. I will say a lot of your cards in your deck are around 3 value. And if you're attacking when big, that average value turns into 5. And 5 value attacks are really good. They're so good, in fact, that they just print 5 value attacks with no text, like Eviscerate, Mr. Pointy, A Hunter's Eye. And if you're attacking your opponent every single time as big with a 5 damage attack, they can only block that for so long. And a lot of your attacks even go higher than that, or have additional effects that do more damage, which is really good. If you do end your turn as big, though, your opponent will probably be more inclined to attack you, as you won't have a defensive bonus. So keep in mind that if you're ever ending your turn as big, make sure you have at least a semi-decent block card in your hand so you can mitigate at least some of the damage your opponent is probably going to try to throw at you. When you're small, you get a 1 defensive bonus, which is very similar to the Invisible Man's power. And you have a lot of versatile 2 value cards. When you're small, these turn into 3, which are a lot better to block with than 2s. And you have versatile 3s that turn into 4s when you block. I'll get more on these values in the next slide, but this is the most interesting ability, I think, in Battle of Legends Volume 1. But it is super inconsistent. So something that Dave Bunce, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, brought up in the comments of one of my other videos is that he says King Arthur is bad because he has terrible deck consistency. This is a really good point that I've kind of overlooked until now. If we look at the amount of unique cards each character has, based on the 3 that I've analyzed so far, King Arthur has 16 unique cards. Sinbad, if we're counting all his voyages as one type of card, which I think is perfectly reasonable, has 10 unique cards. And Alice has 15. The problem with having a high number of unique cards is that, sure, you have a bunch of really powerful cards, but because you have so few copies of them, there are some games where you just won't see them because they'll just be on the bottom of your deck, and because you only have 1 copy, it's all based on where that 1 card lies and whether or not you draw it or not, which is why having 1 copy of Excalibur sucks for King Arthur, and why Bigfoot having 3 copies of Larger Than Life is absolutely insane. So anyway, a reason why Sinbad is so good is because his entire power revolves around voyages, and voyages are almost a quarter of his deck, which means he's going to see a lot of voyages each game because it's literally a fourth of his deck. Alice and King Arthur both have a ton of unique cards, and sure, some of them are powerful, but like I said before, you might not even draw those cards, so it doesn't matter how powerful a specific individual card has. Because of the consistency of your deck, you just might not see it. And this is the problem with Alice's deck composition. She has 3 copies of 3 cards, 2 copies of 9 cards, and 1 copy of 3 cards. A lot of these cards have different effects, and a lot of them are also variably useful based on what size she is. And because she won't always be the right size at the right time, she's just lacking consistency. And so that means that Alice will probably underperform a lot because she has a lot of different cards, and based on what size she is, the cards she does have may or may not be useful. In addition, each square in each column represents the printed value of that card. So for example, the leftmost card has a printed value of 3. A lot of her cards have low printed values because of her ability to increase the value of her cards with her size, which makes sense from a balance perspective. But if you look at her deck, she only has 5 copies of cards that have at least a printed value of 4, when a lot of other characters tend to have a lot more 4s. And that means if she's ever the wrong size for using a card, that card is usually worse than the card would be for another character. It does mean, though, when she is the right size, the card is a lot better. But again, this is variability that will lead to inconsistency, and it makes her cards super weak if she isn't using them with the right size bonus. So with all that in mind, let's start talking about some of her specific cards. We're going to talk about the 3 1-copy cards first. The first is Snicker-Snack. It is a 3-value attack for Alice only. Again, you only have 1 copy of it, and its boost value is 4. It says, after combat, if you won the combat, look at your opponent's hand and choose one card for them to discard. So right away, 3 value is not that great for attacks. So you should really only use this when you're big. So it's 5. And most of the time, when you attack with a 5 value card, you'll probably win the combat unless they play a feint. The effect on this card is bonkers. I tend to undervalue looking at your opponent's hand because most of the time, if you know their deck, you can probably guess what they're holding. But being able to look at their hand and force them to discard a card is absolutely insane. It's just, you could just win the game based on what you pick. Their best defense card. Oh, their best attack card. It's gone. It's crazy. The downside is you only have one copy of this card, so you might not even see it during the game. But when you do get it off, it will probably be a very, very strong effect. You should use this when your opponent's hand is full, because obviously if you use it when their hand only has 2 cards in it, that's a lot less probability that they'll have a good card for you to discard. Whereas if they're holding 6 or 7 cards, probably a lot more likely that they'll have something you actually want to discard. So just keep that in mind when you're attacking them. The other side of the mushroom, another Alice only attack, 3 value, 4 boost, 1 copy. And it says, after combat, move Alice up to 3 spaces, change size. Again, 3 value, not very good for attacks, so you want to use this when you're big, and it's a value 5. It is a skirmish effect with a size change. It's a little bit better than normal skirmish because you're moving 3 spaces instead of 2, which again is good for a 2-move character. And it also helps if this is the second action on your turn. You use this, move away from the enemy, and change size. So now you're small when it's not your turn, and you have a nice defensive bonus from that. But again, you only have 1 copy of this, so maybe you just don't see it. It's also not super powerful, so it's kind of fine if you don't see it. And another thing to note about the way her cards work in general, whenever a card says change size, it's not saying you may change size, it's saying you have to change size. So whenever you play a card that says change size, you have to change size. So maybe if you want to stay a certain size on a certain turn, that is just an extra consideration to think about for what card you're going to play. This is a pronunciation nightmare. Oh, Frabjous Day. Another Alice only attack. This one is a 4 value, another 4 boost, and you have 1 copy. And this says, after combat, change size. So this is just a strong attack with a size change attached to it. 4 value is good for an attack because normally the opponent is blocking with something that's around 3. But if you are big when you're using this, a 6 value attack is excellent. And of course, that number can't be feinted, so you're just going to deal 6 damage. If you're big, it's good because you can use this to deal a lot of damage, and then if it's the second action on your turn, you'll be small. And even though you're right next to the enemy, you'll still be small and have a defensive bonus. If you're small, I would use this as the first action on your turn so that you can then change big and then attack them again. But that requires the enemy to position themselves to end their turn right next to you, which can be kind of dangerous against Alice, but you can kind of bait them into that by being small. And you only have 1 copy, which kind of sucks because this is the highest value red card in your deck. I'm Late is a 2 value versatile card for Alice only. You have 3 copies of it, and the boost value is 3. So a value of 2 is pretty bad for defense, as most attacks are around 4. So you should probably use this when you're small. A 3 value block card is pretty good, and a card that moves you 5 spaces. 5 spaces is insane. And if you're using this on defense, you're moving when it's not your turn, which is a really efficient use of that action. So this is a pretty good card. You can use this when you're big as a skirmish supersized for 5 spaces of movement, but it only does 4 damage, and you kind of need this card to block in your deck because you don't really have a lot of good designated block cards. So I tend to use this on defense only, preferably when I'm small, but if I have to use it when I'm big and there's no other options in my hand, I guess that's fine. Mad as a Hatter is a 3-value versatile card, again for Alice only. You have 2 copies of it, and the boost value is 1. This is another good versatile card that I sort of make defense only, but you can variably use it. It is a 5 if you attack when it's big, but it is a 4 when you use it when you're small, which you don't really have a lot of 4-value cards in your deck. So if you can block with 4s whenever you can, I tend to prefer that. Moving when it's not your turn, again, is great. And this moves both of your fighters. You have to use this card as Alice, but this will also move the Jabberwock, and it has a size change attached to it. So I really like using this when I'm small as a block card, because then I'm big for when it's my turn, and I get to position both of my fighters when it's not my turn, so that when it is my turn, they're in the correct position. This is a pretty good card. Worst case scenario, it's just a worse skirmish. But if you're attacking with it, it's also fine. This is one of the best versatile cards you have. You just have to keep in mind that you can only use it with Alice, which is the biggest downside of this. Speaking of being mad as a hatter, let me sell my soul real quick. It seems that a lot of you still aren't subscribed to my channel. I just did my 100 subscriber special where I took 5 bites of an onion and promptly spat out a 6th. But if you've just forgotten to subscribe at this point, this is just a gentle reminder, a gentle nudge, a loving embrace to go just hit that big red button. Please forgive me. Let's talk about one of the best defensive cards in the entire game, Looking Glass. It is a 2-value defense only for Alice. You have 2 copies of it, and the boost value is 4. You actually have quite a lot of high boost value cards in this deck. And it says, after combat, choose 2 different effects. Draw 2 cards, Alice recovers 3 health, or place Alice in any other space. Right away, I can tell you this is one of the strongest cards in the entire game of Unmatched. Sure, the 2 value is not good on defense. I've already said that. But when you use it when you're small, it's 3 value, which isn't terrible, but it gives you just so many options to do. Think about it like this. If you take the recover health option, it's basically a printed value of 5. Printed value of 5 defense cards just don't exist. There's one in Willow's deck, but it's just insanely good. Even if this card only said draw 2 cards after it, you don't have any card draw in this deck besides this and one of the next cards we're about to talk about. So I typically will always draw cards and recover health, but the movement option is nice because you can literally teleport anywhere you want on the map. As a 2 movement character, that's phenomenal. If the enemy's trying to run away from you, if you've got them down to like 2 HP and they're just fleeing the scene, you just teleport to them and everything's good. And it moves you when it's not your turn, which is awesome. If you use this card twice, which you have 2 copies of, you basically are adding 6 health to your max HP, which makes you 19 health, which is also very good. It's unfortunate that you can't use this health on the Jabberwock, but Alice recovering health is still nice. 6 points of healing is a lot, and the fact that it's contained to 2 cards as opposed to having 1 point of healing on 6 cards is very nice. That is a nice consistent touch in a deck that lacks consistency, but just this card is phenomenal. I cannot stress how good this card is. It's amazing. These next 2 schemes are very similar, so we're going to talk about them together. The first one is Eat Me. You have 2 copies of this, boost value 3, and it's Alice only. It says move Alice up to 3 spaces, change size. If you are big, I would use this as your second action on a turn after attacking to retreat and be in a good position to be small when it's your opponent's turn. If you are small, I would use this as the first action on your turn to move to the enemy, surprising them as you'll be moving 3 spaces instead of 2, and then attack them as big with a combat bonus. Those are the most practical uses I see of this card. I would not waste the movement. I would use this card to make use of its ability on this turn because you're trying to end the game pretty quickly, so you don't want to waste an action on your turn by just using this to move around and change size when you don't really have a purpose to. So if that makes sense, be efficient when using this card. The next card is Drink Me. Mostly the same as Eat Me, except the boost value is 1 point lower, and it says draw 2 cards, change size. This is a very good card because this and Looking Glass are the only card draw cards, besides Regroup, but I don't really count that, in Alice's deck. And it draws 2 cards instead of just 1, and you have 2 copies of this. It changes size, sure, but you're primarily going to be playing this for the draw 2 cards. This has less clear-cut situations to use this for than Eat Me does. Basically, if you're ever low on cards and you want to be a different size on your turn when you have this card in your hand, just play it. It's pretty flexible, and card draw is good because it minimizes the negative effect that consistency can have on your hands. Because the more cards you draw, the more consistent your hand will be. And that's just a good thing for Alice. Alice needs all the help she can get and all the card draw she can get. Now let's talk about the Jabberwock. Alice's mysterious sidekick. This is one of the best sidekicks because it has 8 health, which is very beefy for a sidekick, and its attacks are phenomenal. The only downside with the Jabberwock is that he only has 4 specific cards in the attacks that we're about to talk about. So you might only see 1 or 2 of them each game. And if you don't get them early in the game while the Jabberwock is still alive, that sucks. He also has no specific defensive options. Alice has a pair of versatile cards that are actually Alice only that you can't use to block for the Jabberwock. So make sure you actually have a Regroup, a Feint, a Momentous Shift, a Skirmish, or a Manxome Foe, which we'll talk about later, to keep this guy alive. Because if you can use all 4 of his attacks in a game, you're just going to shred your opponent's health. What are these attacks? Again, they're pretty similar, so we'll talk about them together. The first one is Claws That Catch. It is a 3-value attack. You have 2 copies of it, and the boost value is 2. And it says, during combat, if the opposing fighter is a hero, this card's value is 5. So it's kind of like a Momentous Shift that I would say you would always use on a hero. Don't use this on a sidekick. This is just good. I talked about earlier how 5-value cards are just good. This is a 5-value attack. It is susceptible to Feint, but both of these attacks are. And generally, when you're attacking as the Jabberwock, if your opponent knows your deck, he's probably going to want to Feint both of these cards. So this makes it really easy to regroup bait with the Jabberwock, which is a nice strategy. This card is just good. It's probably around the same level as Momentous Shift. Although if you attack a hero every single time with this card, it's probably a little bit more consistent than Momentous Shift, but you can't use it to block. But if you just kill your opponent fast enough, they won't be able to attack you back, so you won't need to block. That's the strategy for this guy. And the other attack is Jaws That Bite, a 4-value attack. You also have 2 copies of it, and it also has a boost too. And it says, after combat, deal 2 damage to any one fighter adjacent to the Jabberwock. This is a really good card to deal with crowd control. Basically, if Medusa is surrounding you with 3 of her harpies, you can attack one of them with this, maybe kill it, and then use the after combat effect to deal 2 damage and instantly kill another one. This is good if the enemy tries to box you in. It's also just a good card in general. It does 6 total damage, obviously not all in one attack though. And if it doesn't get feinted, dealing 2 damage is a lot. Counterpunch is a really good card for Sherlock Holmes. This is kind of just a more aggressive attack-only version of that card. So basically, you have 22 damage in these 2 cards if you're attacking heroes. That's insane. The downside is, and I already mentioned this, you only have 2 copies of each of these, so you just might not see them. You also need to keep the Jabberwock alive long enough for you to draw both of these cards. And if they're at the bottom of your deck, that just really sucks. And the last Alice-specific card we're going to talk about is Manxome Foe. It is a versatile any, 3-value. You have 2 copies of it, and the boost value is 2. It says, during combat, discard the top card of your deck add its boost value to this card's value. This is the blind boost effect from the Buffy the Vampire set. Both Willow and Spike make use of this effect a lot, except they simplified the wording, so now it just has the keyword blind boost. The average boost value for your deck, excluding one copy of this card, obviously, because you need to play this card, and it obviously can't discard itself if you're playing it because it's in play and not on your deck, whatever, is a little over 2, which is pretty good. So that means just the card itself will deal a little bit over 5 damage on average, but when you're big, it'll deal a little bit over 7 damage on average, and that's nasty if it doesn't get fainted. You also have quite a few boost value 4s in your deck, which means you have the potential to deal 9 damage with a single attack. And sure, it takes 2 cards for that, and all the boost value 4 cards in your deck you actually want to play and not discard, but that's just bonkers potential. And if your opponent, for some reason, doesn't block when you're big or plays a regroup on defense, you basically wiped out half their health in a single attack, and that's great. This is what I was talking about earlier when I said Alice tends to favor an aggressive playstyle, because blind boosting a card, yeah, it is terrible if you discard one copy of Looking Glass, but if you deal enough damage using this, then it doesn't really matter that you lost a card. You want to kill your opponent as fast as possible. It also ends the game quicker. If you use this twice, you'll have 2 cards burned off the top of your deck, which means you'll exhaust your draw pile faster. So just kill them faster. It also is a really good defense card. If you're playing this while small, this is a 6 value block card. I tend to not want to use this card like that. You could in a dire situation where you really need to not die this turn. But if you're in that situation as Alex, you're probably going to lose anyway. So yeah, the option is there, but I would rather use this to deal a bunch of damage to the enemy. And this effect is not optional, meaning you can't just play this card as a 3 value attack. You have to discard the top card. It's much like the change size on the other cards. And the basic cards in Alice's deck. You have 3 feints, 2 skirmishes, 2 momentous shifts, and 3 regroups. Feints, when you're small, have a value 3, which is great defensively. I would not play this on offense in this deck because you have a lot of cards like Manxome Foe, for example, that you can just kill your opponent with while doing a bunch of damage. Skirmishes are the highest value versatile card in your deck. I would use these to block for the Jabberwock, as it's probably the best option for that. But if you're attacking when you're big, 6 damage is a lot. But I tend to save this card for defense because it's one of the best defensive cards in your deck. Momentous shifts are very good when you're big. They'll deal 7 damage. But you might need them to block because Alice has a lot of attacks. So you have to sparingly use your versatiles in a way that you don't die by running out of cards to block with. But momentous shifts are really good when you're big. And regroups. Regroups are, I guess they're a little bit better on defense now that they have a value of 2 instead of 1. But it's also really good bait when you're big because they'll deal 3 damage. You might actually have a chance of winning that combat. And they're really good bait for the Jabberwock because, as I mentioned, both of the Jabberwock specific attacks are really good to feint for the opponent. So when you attack them with your Jabberwock, maybe throw in a regroup and watch the sadness take hold of their face when they feint something that isn't your claws or your jaws. Now it's time to give my final thoughts on Alice. Alice is super interesting to play because you're constantly granted the opportunity to plan out and carefully strategize your size changes and things like that. But your deck leaves a lot to be desired. The high variability in your deck from the cards and the composition, and the low amount of card draw leads to inconsistent gameplay, which just adds to the extra challenge to an already semi-complex character. For example, Snicker-Snack will sometimes just win you the game. If you play that against King Arthur and discard his Excalibur, that's insane, but sometimes it'll do nothing. That's variability. Your ability, you might be big at the right time to deal a bunch of damage. You might also be stuck as small for a few turns because you don't have the right cards to change your size. That's variability. The design of her ability is really cool. It's arguably the most interesting ability in Battle of Legends Volume 1. But in practice, she's just not that strong. She's certainly better than King Arthur, that's for sure. Almost every character is better than King Arthur. But aside from a few good matchups, it's like the Queen of England once said, off with her head. Thank you so much for watching this video. I would really appreciate it if you used your mouse or your finger to hit the like button and the subscribe button. And for bonus effort points, hit the bell icon so you get notified whenever I make a new video. That would be really great. I'm praying to the YouTube algorithm gods for 2021 to be my year. And if you could just exert the minimum amount of effort required to help me, that would be great. Medusa will be coming out probably within the next 2 weeks. I'm going to make a update video for 2021 probably later today, and I'll include some information on that in there. So that's all I got for you today. Go take a shower, you smell. Peace.